At 55, Gerard Butler's life has taken a turn no one expected. The man who once lit up Hollywood screens with charm and strength now faces a reality far removed from fame's bright lights. Behind his trademark smile lies a story of pain, loss, and quiet courage. When fans saw what he recently revealed, hearts around the world broke. This isn't just another celebrity update. It's a raw glimpse into the fragile human side of a man we all thought we knew. Before the fame, before the roar of "This is Sparta," Gerard Butler was just a small boy in the gray streets of Paisley, Scotland. A boy who spent too many nights staring at the rain on the window, waiting for a father who never came home. He didn't grow up surrounded by luxury or security. What he had was a tired mother, Margaret, who worked herself to exhaustion just to keep her children fed and warm. The apartment was small, damp, and quiet. Too quiet. That silence was the sound of absence, of questions that no one could answer, of a child wondering why love sometimes disappears without warning. When Gerard was just a baby, his parents had moved to Canada chasing a better life. But when the marriage fell apart, his father vanished, leaving his mother alone with 3 children and a heart full of worry. She packed what little they had and returned to Scotland. From then on, Gerard grew up without a father, without closure, and without understanding why. He often said later that his mother gave them everything, even when she had nothing. Her love became the roof over their heads, her strength the only light in those dark years. For 14 years, Gerard didn't hear a word from his father. No letters, no phone calls, just silence. He learned early that sometimes people don't come back, no matter how much you hope they will. That kind of loneliness shapes a person. It made him hungry, not for fame yet, but for meaning, for something that made him feel seen. He threw himself into school, becoming head boy, excelling in everything, trying to fill the emptiness with achievement. On the outside, he looked confident. On the inside, he was still that boy by the window, waiting. Then one day, when he was 16, the silence broke. His stepfather told him quietly, "Your father's here." Gerard froze. When the man finally walked in, all the anger, all the longing, everything he had buried came pouring out. He cried for hours, not out of hate, but from the sheer weight of all those lost years. For a while, they tried to rebuild something. Summers in Toronto, small moments of connection, laughter that felt like healing. But just when it seemed possible, his father died of cancer. The reunion had come too late. That loss carved something permanent in him, a space that no success could ever fill. But it also gave him fire. From the love of his mother, he learned endurance. From the loss of his father, he learned drive. And from the silence of his childhood, he learned empathy. The ability to feel deeply, to understand pain in others. Those lessons became the soul behind every character he ever played. The boy who waited by the window never truly disappeared. He just learned to stand up, wipe his tears, and keep walking, stronger for having known the silence. By the time Gerard Butler was in his early 20s, he looked like a man with a plan. He had a law degree, a sharp mind, and a future that promised stability. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Just a week before he was set to qualify as a lawyer in Edinburgh, everything fell apart. One night of heavy drinking at the Edinburgh Festival cost him his job and the life he thought he wanted. He was fired, humiliated, and lost. Years later, he would call that moment his wake-up call, the disaster that quietly saved him. But at the time, it felt like his entire world had collapsed. With no job and no clear direction, Gerard did what so many dreamers do. He ran towards something unknown. He packed a small suitcase, scraped together a few pounds, and took a train to London. The city didn't care who he was. It greeted him with cold wind, gray skies, and indifference. He crashed on friends' couches when he could. Other nights, he wandered the streets just to stay warm, too proud to admit he had nowhere to sleep. The streets became both his classroom and his test. Hunger taught him humility. Loneliness taught him focus. Every night, he promised himself, "This isn't where it ends." Work came in fragments. He waited tables in restaurants where no one bothered to learn his name. He sold toys in the rain, smiling through the chill as kids ran past him laughing. Sometimes he'd perform silly tricks with plastic swords just to earn a few extra coins. Behind that forced grin, though, was a fire that wouldn't go out. When customers mocked his accent, he laughed along. But later, when the streets emptied, the laughter turned to tears. He was a man no one noticed, trying to convince himself he still mattered. Then came the turning point. One of those small, ordinary moments that change everything. A woman he knew from the Scottish Youth Theatre offered him a job as her assistant. She was now a casting director, and she saw something in him that he couldn't yet see himself. Gerard spent his days organizing auditions, handing out scripts, watching other people chase dreams he'd buried. But deep down, something started to stir again. He realized he didn't want to be behind the scenes. He wanted to be the one on stage. One day, he followed his boss to an audition for Coriolanus, directed by Steven Berkoff. He wasn't supposed to read. He was just there to help. But desperation is louder than permission. He asked to audition, and Berkoff agreed, amused by his boldness. When Gerard began to speak, the room changed. Every word carried years of struggle, shame, and hunger. Berkoff saw it instantly. This wasn't just an actor reading lines. This was a man fighting for his life. He cast him on the spot. That night, Gerard walked through the London rain, soaked but smiling for the first time in years. He didn't have money, he didn't have fame, but he had purpose. He had found something that made the suffering make sense. From that moment, he chased acting with the same intensity that had once fueled his survival. Success didn't come quickly. He took tiny roles in Mrs. Brown, Tomorrow Never Dies, Blink and You'll Miss It parts that most people would forget. But he didn't. Every small job was a step forward. Every rejection was fuel. He learned to live on hope and coffee, to keep showing up when no one expected him to. Then came Dracula 2000. It was supposed to be his breakout. The movie flopped, but he didn't. He kept going. And in 2004, he landed The Phantom of the Opera. He wasn't a trained singer, but he threw himself into it anyway. He sang until his throat bled, terrified of failing again. When the film earned critical praise, he finally felt redemption. 3 years later, 300 exploded onto screens. Suddenly, the man who once sold toys on the street was leading armies on screen. The roar heard around the world. "This is Sparta!" wasn't just a line. It was the sound of every scar, every heartbreak, every lonely night in London coming to life. That roar belonged to the boy who refused to give up, the man who had nothing and built everything from it. Behind the fame, he still remembered the hunger. He never forgot the feeling of being invisible, and maybe that's why he never let success harden him. For Gerard Butler, the journey from law to legend wasn't about luck. It was about grit, pain, and the kind of faith you only find when you've already lost everything. He didn't rise because the world chose him. He rose because he never stopped choosing himself, even when no one else did. Fame made Gerard Butler a warrior on screen, but behind the spotlight, his real battles were fought far away from the camera. For every roar, every red carpet smile, there was a bruise, a scar, a night spent in silence trying to pull himself back together. The world saw strength, that unstoppable, roaring figure leading Spartans into battle. But the truth was far more human, far more fragile. His pain didn't come from swords or shields. It came from life itself, the kind that breaks you slowly, piece by piece, until all that's left is your will to rise again. When 300 hit theaters in 2007, it changed everything. It made him a global name, a symbol of masculine power and resilience. But behind the scenes, the process of becoming King Leonidas nearly destroyed him. The training was relentless. 25 pull-ups, 50 push-ups, 50 deadlifts, 50 box jumps over and over until he could barely stand. His body tore itself apart. He developed nerve damage in his leg and a condition called foot drop that made it hard to walk. But he refused to quit. He limped through pain that would have stopped anyone else, hiding it under that fierce expression that the world came to admire. When he shouted, "This is Sparta," on set, it wasn't just acting, it was survival. But his pain didn't end when the camera stopped rolling. In 2003, during Lara Croft, The Cradle of Life, he almost killed his co-star by accident. A prop gun misfired inches from Angelina Jolie's face. For a split second, he thought he had taken someone's life. The fear haunted him long after the set was cleared. A few years later, during Butterfly on a Wheel, he was crushed between a Range Rover and a wall in a stunt gone wrong. His neck screamed in agony. His hip felt like it was on fire, but he still finished the scene. He always finished. The physical pain became a constant companion, but it wasn't the only kind that followed him. While his career skyrocketed, his personal life began to crack under the weight of it all. He lived between time zones, chasing film after film, trying to outrun exhaustion and emptiness. Sleep became a stranger, and so did peace. In 2011, while filming Chasing Mavericks in Northern California, Gerard faced one of his darkest moments. He was caught by a massive wave, thrown underwater, and pinned down by the ocean's weight. For what felt like forever, he spun in total darkness. He later said, "I thought, this is how it ends." He was pulled out barely alive, his lungs filled with seawater, his body shaking uncontrollably. The painkillers prescribed after that accident saved him and then nearly destroyed him. They numbed the pain, but they also numbed everything else. What started as recovery turned into dependency. The man who had once conquered the impossible now had to face a battle no one could see. In 2012, Gerard checked himself into the Betty Ford Clinic. There were no cameras, no scripts, no applause, just a man confronting his own reflection and asking if he still recognized the person staring back. He came out sober, scarred, but determined. "I learned that survival isn't about strength," he said. "It's about surrender." But fate wasn't finished testing him. In 2017, while trying an experimental therapy to manage chronic pain, bee venom injections, his body reacted violently. His throat closed up, his vision blurred, his chest locked. For a few terrifying moments, he thought it was over. He recovered, only to try again a few days later, convinced he could handle it. The same thing happened. His friends thought he was crazy, but to him, it was just another fight to keep living. That same year, he was thrown from his motorcycle in Los Angeles, flying 33 feet through the air before hitting the ground hard. His shoulder shattered, his leg broke in multiple places, and yet when he woke up in the hospital, he joked, "Guess I'm still here." Pain had become his shadow, constant, loyal, unrelenting. But instead of letting it destroy him, Gerard started to see it differently. "Maybe pain isn't the enemy," he said once. "Maybe it's the teacher." Every scar reminded him he was still alive. Every ache kept him humble. He no longer fought to escape the pain. He learned to live with it, to let it shape him instead of consume him. But the physical pain wasn't the only one that left marks. Love, too, had its way of breaking him. Relationships came and went, some gentle, others stormy. He fell hard, trusted fully, and lost deeply. The women who crossed his path, the ones who loved him, left him, or were left behind, became part of his story. Each love taught him something new about himself, about timing, about how even the strongest hearts can still bleed quietly in the dark. And then there was loss, the kind no one can prepare for, the kind that makes even warriors crumble. In 2025, his mother Margaret passed away. The woman who had carried him through every storm, who had taught him how to endure, was gone. The world didn't see that moment. There were no headlines, no public tears, just a man standing in the rain outside a small Scottish church, saying goodbye to the person who had made him who he was. He later dedicated his film, How to Train Your Dragon, to her, with a single line in the credits, "For Margaret Butler, whose strength lives on in her son." When he saw it for the first time, he cried, not the loud tears of a movie scene, but the quiet kind that come when love turns into memory. And still, he kept going. He rebuilt his home after it burned down in the 2018 California fires. He rebuilt his health, his focus, and eventually, his peace. For Gerard Butler, pain stopped being a punishment. It became proof that he had lived, loved, fallen, and risen again. The man who once shouted across a battlefield learned that real power isn't about muscles or fame. It's about endurance, forgiveness, and grace. Today, every movement reminds him of what he's been through. The torn tendons, the crushed nerves, the broken bones. But he doesn't hide from it. "There isn't a day I don't feel it," he once said. "But it reminds me I'm still here." His pain became his strength, his scars his story. The fire that once threatened to consume him now burns quietly inside him, not as destruction, but as light. For Gerard Butler, pain didn't just test him, it defined him. It stripped away everything false until only the truth remained. That strength isn't about being unbreakable, it's about breaking again and again, and still finding the courage to rise. At 55, Gerard Butler no longer wakes up to the sound of chaos. No agents calling at dawn, no rushing from one airport to the next, no feeling like the world might collapse if he stops moving. Instead, he wakes to the quiet rhythm of the ocean outside his window. The same Malibu air that once carried the smoke of his burning home now carries peace. After decades of fighting, for fame, for survival, for love, he has finally reached a point in life where he doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. The battles that once defined him have softened into lessons, and the fire that once burned so wildly inside him has become something steadier, warmer, a flame that guides rather than consumes. The journey to that peace wasn't simple. He had lived 1,000 lives before reaching it. The starving actor in London, the broken hero on a hospital bed, the son mourning his mother, the man who watched everything he owned turn to ash. Each version of him had to die so another could live. When the Woolsey fire tore through his home in 2018, it didn't just destroy his house, it stripped him bare. He stood there in the ash, realizing that what he'd lost wasn't just possessions, but pieces of a life that no longer served him. And yet, instead of falling apart, he began again. Slowly, quietly. He rebuilt not just walls, but meaning. The new house wasn't designed for show, it was designed for soul. Wide windows open to the sea, pale wooden floors that catch the morning light, a photo of his late mother on the mantel, and beside it, a single framed line from her final letter, "Kindness is your real strength." That sentence became his mantra, the truth that anchored him as he rebuilt his life. The man who once thrived on chaos learned to love stillness. The actor who once chased validation learned to find peace in anonymity. Gerard's days now begin before sunrise. He brews green tea, steps outside, and breathes in the cool Pacific air. Sometimes he hikes through Malibu Canyon. Sometimes he simply stands barefoot on the sand, watching the sky turn gold. "For years I was running," he once said in an interview, "and I didn't even know what from. Now I just want to be still." That stillness is hard-won. It's the product of pain, of surviving what should have ended him more than once. The ocean that nearly drowned him, the crash that nearly crippled him, the addiction that nearly consumed him. He learned that healing isn't a destination, it's a decision you make every morning. He still works, but differently now. Gone are the days of doing film after film just to stay relevant. He chooses projects that matter, stories about redemption, compassion, resilience. In 2025, he returned to one of his most beloved roles, stoic in the live-action How to Train Your Dragon. It became the highest-grossing film of his career, earning over $500 million worldwide. But what made him proud wasn't the box office. It was what the role represented, a full-circle moment. The same character that once introduced him to children now reminded the world of his heart. "It's not about the numbers anymore," he said softly. "It's about being proud of what I gave." When he's not filming, he spends his time producing and mentoring young actors. He doesn't preach fame or money. He talks about endurance and honesty, about the kind of inner strength that doesn't make headlines. He tells them that real success isn't found on a red carpet. It's found in learning to like who you are when the lights go out. That's the wisdom of a man who's been through everything and come out the other side with humility intact. Philanthropy has become his second calling. The man who once struggled to feed himself now helps feed millions. Through the Scottish charity Mary's Meals, he supports schools and kitchens across Africa and Haiti. He travels to those places not as a celebrity, but as a volunteer, serving food, laughing with children, kneeling in the dirt with a smile that has nothing to do with fame. "When I see their joy," he said, "it reminds me what really matters. The world tries to tell you it's money or success, but it's not. It's connection." He still carries his pain, the nerve damage in his leg, the ache in his shoulder, the old injuries that never quite healed, but he's stopped fighting them. Instead, he treats his body with the same gentleness he once reserved for others. His workouts are slower now, focused on balance and strength rather than vanity. He practices meditation, breathes through the pain, and reminds himself that every scar is proof of endurance. "I used to think power was about pushing through," he said once. "Now I know it's about knowing when to rest." His personal life has found the same calm. After years of relationships that came and went under the glare of cameras, Gerard has chosen privacy over publicity. Friends say he's quietly seeing someone outside the industry, someone grounded, kind, and uninterested in Hollywood's noise. Whether it becomes love or simply companionship, he seems at peace either way. He's learned that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about presence, the quiet comfort of being seen, not as a star, but as a man. The boy from Paisley, who once waited by the window for a father who never came home, now stands in a home he built with his own 2 hands, surrounded by reminders of everything he's survived. The silence that once haunted him has become his refuge. The storms that once nearly destroyed him taught him how to find shelter within himself. And the fame that once defined him now simply decorates his story. It no longer controls it. Sometimes he walks along the shore at dusk, the waves brushing against his feet, and he thinks about how far he's come, from a struggling actor sleeping on friends' couches to a man whose story has touched millions. He doesn't roar anymore. He doesn't need to. The quiet strength in his eyes says it all. "I've broken bones, lost people, burned homes," he once reflected, "but I'm still here. Maybe that's the victory." At 55, Gerard Butler is not the warrior who shouts into battle. He is the survivor who sits in peace, knowing he has already won the hardest fights. His power now lies not in his muscles or fame, but in his calm, in the ability to feel deeply, love freely, and keep standing no matter how many times life knocks him down. He's proof that rebirth doesn't happen once. It happens every time you decide to begin again. And when he looks out over the Pacific, the sunlight dancing on the waves, he carries with him every version of himself. The hungry boy, the broken man, the star, the sun. All of them live quietly inside him, finally at home. Because the truth of Gerard Butler's story isn't about fame or fortune, it's about transformation. It's about a man who has fallen, burned, healed, and still rises. Not louder, but stronger. Not in fury, but in peace.